Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Soul Focused Radio. This is your host, Martin Friedman, and I am super excited to be joined by Maya Savage for part 2 of our podcast, Getting to Know Her. Hey, Maya, how are you doing?
I'm good, Martin. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Got the sun shining in here.
Very nice.
Yeah, I know you do too. Both Maya and I currently live in the Boca Raton area
Yes, yes,
in
we
South
do.
Florida. Yes, yes. So the conversation that I really wanted to have with you, this is a conversation that you and I and your mom have a lot. Maya doesn't live in the same apartment with us, but in the same complex. So we get to spend a lot of time together. And certainly we spent a lot of time together over the pandemic
Right.
because we were all kind of cleared through quarantine. So we were the main company for each other for about the last year and a half. And
Yeah.
so we've had such a wide range of conversations. And, one of the conversations that we keep coming back to is healing. And we keep coming back to the conversation of healing from trauma that doesn't just happen in this lifetime, but that's happened generationally to us and how, what that journey is. So maybe even Maya, if you could just start a little bit, just talking about even what does healing mean to you? And then just tell us a little bit about the healing journey that you've been on and whatever you want to say.
Yeah, healing, if I think about my definition, my working definition that has become very real in my life is acceptance and perspective.
Mhm.
For me, my aggravation with so much of society was about the way that I was not accepting myself, the ways that I wasn't being accepted, and the ways I needed to really shift that narrative and shift the ways that I was relating to myself and therefore relating to others. So I would say that would be my working definition of healing.
And so where are you in that journey? I think one of the conversations we have a lot is that healing isn't, there's really no final destination, right? Because
Right.
we're constantly changing, in these human forms that we're currently occupying is, nothing stays the same, nothing stays stagnant. So to say that there is just this one magical point of healing just wouldn't be accurate because we continue to have to heal, right? So
Right.
maybe just so tell us a little bit about what that journey has looked like for you and kind of where you are on that journey too.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start at the it's not the beginning, because the beginning is the moment that I was brought into this earth, and I would say that there was definitely a lot of challenges growing up in a household of two parents who really there was a lot of dysfunction as far as communication and the way that violence was present in verbal conflict, and so my healing journey really didn't begin until I accepted or had that feeling of discomfort and discomfort from the feeling of discomfort in my body. So at, I would say, 12 years old, I started experiencing lower back pain.
Mm.
That was kind of just out of the blue. I'd been a dancer from at that point in time for the last 7 years. So, but I was a dancer who did not take dancing very seriously. So I wasn't doing my stretches before or after dances. Similar to a lot of kids, just focus on youth. So realizing that if I didn't practice, then and anything happened, I would be able to heal pretty quickly. So I didn't really notice that that was such an impact until I got older. And so I started to move my body more and notice for myself that I had been moving with a lot of unconscious movement. So kind of just moving very sporadically. And I was really attached to my great grandma had a 8.5 shoe size. And when I
Mm.
was younger, I was able to wear her shoes, and I would love to go through her closet because she was like a very gaudy individual who had like sequins and, just like soft fabrics that I loved. And her shoe collection, I remember she
Mm.
would shop all the time. So my great grandma loved shoes. And so anytime that she was done with the shoe or she was ready to pass it on, then I would inherit her shoe. And So I really developed this attachment to being an 8.5 shoe size. And as I got older, and actually this goes back to even our first conversation, Martin, because
Mhm.
when I got accepted into Teach for America, I got accepted, I guess that would have been in November. And in February of that year, or it would be the next year, in 2016, I went to their national conference in DC. So it was amazing because they had a beautiful convention. They were even, to even demonstrate the type of money they had, they were just giving away these really dope Patagonia vests. So
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
like, well, I know I'm in the right organization, and the food was amazing, and there were all these different events. And I remembered when I was packing, I was like, I need some ankle boots. And I was an avid eBay shopper. So I would find all my vintage finds on eBay. And that's a little hint in there. That little situation, I would be in consistent places of trying to find something on eBay. And
Mhm.
so I found these Cole Haan chocolate leather pointed toe ankle boots, and I was like, this is the shoe for DC. And so I wore those shoes the first day for about 10 hours because we're at a conference, so we were participating in different activities, and there was like another couple different events. And then I ended up being young, going out with a friend later on, and wore heels. And 2 days later, I got back to Pittsburgh, and my right foot is on fire. And when I
Hmm.
say fire, it felt like literally somebody was putting a torch to the joint of my right big toe. And at that point in time, I didn't have insurance because I was working a million different jobs. I was Ubering at that point in time, right? All those
Hmm.
different ways of trying to get income. And, so I'm like, let me just go to urgent care. And I go to the urgent care in East Liberty, and they tell me that I have a hairline fracture in my foot. And at that point in time, I was mad. I was angry at myself because I knew those shoes were just a little bit too tight, but they were just so beautiful to me
Hmm.
aesthetically that I was so much more attached to the illusion of them than really the quality of how they felt on my body. And in that way, I still was holding on to that because and started getting these cortisone shots in my foot. So I was getting a cortisone shot once a month, which is a lot. At that point in time, I was what, 25, and so my foot is just getting this cortisone to kind of calm the inflammation, and it kind of feels like it's working. And so I kind of go back to my ways. I'm wearing my heels. I don't put on the Cole Haans ever again. I do sell those, but I continue to buy shoes that are the incorrect size. I continue to buy shoes that are this 8.5 shoe size because of my own attachment of, I'm like, this is great grandma size. I know that I got to be able to wear her shoe. And in that way, I didn't realize how much more harm I was doing to my body. So through that major awakening of noticing that after a whole 2 years later, I was still buying the incorrect shoe size. It got to a point where I was not able to walk for about a week.
Hmm.
And I went to the doctor, and he was like, what shoe size are you wearing? I was like, oh, I'm wearing an 8.5. And he's like, you know that you're a 9,
Hmm.
and really a 9.5 sometimes. And that shock for me was like, why did you have to go to somebody else to tell you about your shoe size, and having that level of attachment to that? And so that was where the pain began, was the bottom, my feet, right? When we're thinking about our foundation, this is our foundation. This is what we need to be able to move at times
Hmm.
in the world. And as a yoga instructor, it completely changed my practice, teaching, as well as my own physical movement. But it didn't happen until, as I said, those 2 years later, until the doctor was like, you need to really, like, what movements are you doing with your foot? And he was amazing, a doctor that I had in the Bronx. And I finally gotten to that point, and being in New York City, you can't have a bad walking shoe. So I started to shift my walking and get shoes that are actually comfortable. So a lot of Doc Martens and Birkenstocks, and what was it,
Hmm.
Danskos, which I thought I would never wear. And in that way, that major issue then trickled into the rest of my body and movement. So if you're walking fast and you're not even being conscious about what's on your feet, then what other things are you being unconscious about? So I was moving from a place of just rushing from item to item, trying to survive in the city, right? Moving from job to job as an educator, teaching within the school systems. And then the next major tragedy with my body occurred when I was hit by a vehicle. And I noticed that I did not say initially, really, I would say up until a whole year later that I was even hit. I kept telling people, and I told mom that I was sideswiped. And she's like, well,
Right.
were you in a vehicle? Are you on a bike? And I'm like, no, it was my body. And so she's like, you got hit by a car. And so it was the second time that somebody else had to tell me what was happening with my own body. And for me, that was the wake up call, because all the ways that I was moving and living my life really was impacting the entire right side of my body. So, and the right side of the body demonstrates the masculine energy. The left side is the more feminine side. And so if we're noticing that one side of the body is having this pain and this disorientation, then we have to think about, once again, where is that coming from? And that comes from my level of generational trauma, of feeling that I've always been in survival mode, that if I'm pausing and sitting still, then I'm not being a productive citizen. Those were some of the ideas that were fostered in, not by my mom, but by, my grandparents, who were really serious about me getting a master's degree, getting my bachelor's degree, and having a $400,000 salary the way that my uncle did. And the impacts of even me being a young Black female, what that meant for my whole life, and what that meant for the ways that I was being perceived to only feel the necessity to produce, versus me feeling that I deserve the opportunity for rest and for pauses. And so me noticing that the right side of my body, that masculine energy that was out of balance, is because that's what I was relying on. I was feeling that I had to be independent, fiercely independent. I was feeling that I had to constantly be the one who was in, a confrontation mode and that place of anger, versus coming into that nurturing side, that feminine energy. And so my trauma has been the reason that I'm nurturing myself now and coming into those places and spaces of rest and pauses and allowing myself to be deserving. But also, Martin, I can't even hold you that if it hadn't been for this pain in my physical body, I don't know if I would have changed,
Right.
you know? And in those ways that, but biggest thing that I hope our listeners get from my sharing of this is the fact that if we just listen to ourselves the first time, and I did not listen to myself that first time I put on that Cole Haan boot, I had felt in my body, in my foot, it was not the right shoe for you. But I was so attached to the illusion. And so my name, Maya, in Sanskrit and in the Hindu culture, means the illusion. And, as I shared in my first part of being raised around a guru and attending spiritual ceremonies within the yoga Hindu culture, I was also given a spiritual name, which is Sumati, which means clarity of mind. And so every time that I'm noticing that I'm getting caught up in the illusion of what, how beautiful or pretty something looks versus really looking at the foundation. And if it's a strong foundation that's rooted in integrity, that's rooted in, that real self-care, which is those pauses, then I need to check myself. And so it gives me an opportunity to constantly check in with myself about, how am I really showing up in this moment? And how am I really going to choose healing versus choosing to be in that place of stagnation that allows for the pain and this mundane level to be what guides my choices in interacting with first myself and then others.
I mean, that's an incredibly powerful story that you shared with us, and also I really appreciated the way that you connected like mind, body, and spirit, right? Because even when we think about generational trauma, what we think about usually is just psychological, right? Just
Right.
emotional, being passed down generationally. But there's a physical, a spiritual, and an emotional or psychological element to it. I think that, what I'd like to hone in on just a little bit is this idea of attachment to illusion.
Mm.
Um, and, if you could maybe just talk a little bit about how that attachment to illusion you've seen generationally in your
Ooh.
family, and where does like
Sorry, Martin. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish your
no
question.
apologies necessary. No apologies necessary. um, and tied in a little bit to the generational oppression, right? Because I think when we talk about generational trauma, what we often don't talk about is the stories behind that trauma. I
Right.
think for most of us, I used to say this about white people, Maya, but I say it about everybody now. I used to say that we're very clear about the dysfunction, but we don't know our family stories. So we know
Oh.
the dysfunction that has reached us, but we don't know the stories. And I've come to expand that. It's not just white people, especially now that I'm part of a family of color, that I'm part of a Black family now.
Right.
There's no question that it feels just as strong in this family as it did in my birth family. That the dysfunction gets passed down, but we don't often talk about those stories. And you can't, you know, talk about that attachment to illusion without also talking about the context of racism, right?
Right.
And patriarchy and classism too, but just how that has played out. So if you could, just sit in that for just a minute and share that with myself and our listeners.
Yes. Powerful question. This has been something I've been pondering a lot lately, especially being here in Boca Raton, Florida, which generationally and historically, the South we ran, right? So most of my family
Mm-hmm.
migrated up north, but I still, my two sides of my family, generationally, we have my biological father, the Savages Fletchers, also here in Frogmore, Louisiana, and then mom's family from the Lanes and the Cloptons, all from and the Wades, all from up north in Sharon, PA, and really just all in the area. And I think about my most immediate family, like my grandma Savage. My grandma Savage was a sharecropper's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So her experience of literally just barely transitioning out of emancipation and not being able to even own the land that their family worked. And even the land, I've seen it in recent years, about 7 years ago, and us still not even really having a claim to that land, but her working so hard and being in a place of trying to navigate what life meant. Getting married was a first step for her. She had to. All the women really, and that's my great grandma on mom's side. That was my grandma Lane on mom's side, all had to utilize, and I appreciate you talking about bringing up patriarchy, because they were not going to have access to land or opportunities if it was not for a man at that point in time. And so I stand on their shoulders because I'm able to live by myself in an apartment that I've signed the lease to. Like, that is,
Mm-hmm.
historically, I've changed. I've been the only person to be able to do that. Not even my mom has been able to access that in so many ways. And so that alone, that's just one layer. And also the layer of what it meant for us to be able to access occupation and work that we love and are passionate about. Nobody else in my family was able to access that until mom. And that was literally because she was born in the 60s. And so, once again, historically speaking, there was a much, after the civil rights movement, we had a little bit more access, but that's why she was considered such a rebel, of like, you're unwed and you're having kids, or you trying to have kids. And why would that be the way that you would end up being able to access life? And so all the intersections of, my grandma Savage worked and cleaned in white folks home up until my biological father was 15.
Mm,
And then she got a job at the post office and then worked there until she retired at 74,
mm,
or I'm sorry, 64. And for her to own her own home in Michigan, in Flint, Michigan. So when she had even married my grandfather, he was a war veteran. And so he actually ended up losing his mind when he came back. So he passed away inside of a mental institution in Michigan. And my dad was not raised by him and never even got to meet him. And in that way, that like also the way that war impacted my family, my great grandfather was a World War II veteran, and he wasn't even able to access the GI Bill. So even
mm,
when I think about historically, 30 years after 30, he wasn't able to buy his home till 30 years after the GI Bill. So by that time, everybody, all the white veterans, had already paid off their 30-year mortgages. And
mm,
so the impacts of that, even that generational wealth and that the way that that began, that can't be given back, right? There's no, there's no amount of reparations in that situation because he didn't even have access to something that he should have legally had access to. And with redlining and all the housing covenants that we still know of even today that are being unearthed, he really was not able to have that type of access. So I think about the ways that, the Black men in my family, how their situation really changed their outlook on the world. So they talked, my great grandpa talked all about hardworking, like, and this is all you need to do. You need to stay focused and work hard, and then
mhm,
you'll be able to get a house. And for me, it was always viewing also that they were really tired and they weren't even able to fully enjoy their retirement because they worked so hard to get there,
mm,
And so seeing that within my family dynamic, and then also seeing that my biological father had chosen to kind of assimilate, and so did my grandparents, and so did my great grandparents in a lot of ways. And they assimilated due to the necessity for survival. They had to, because if they were quote unquote talking loud or did any hand movements that even could have been subtly considered to be disrespectful to white folks, their lives could have ended. And so, me being here in a predominantly white conservative location known as Boca Raton, Florida, and to have an apartment here in the sun on the top floor feels like this is breaking generational trauma and curses, and that's one of my favorite t-shirts I wear is, I've been breaking generational curses since conception. And
mm,
you know there's so many ways that I've had to always remember, and I heard you of saying that, you know we do talk about our dysfunction, but we don't talk about the ways that we got here. And I'm grateful that I do know that my family had really worked hard to be in a situation that was different, but I also know what they gave up because of that. And I know that there were ways, more free and liberated ways of being that they weren't able to even fathom or have access to. And in those ways that everybody in my family had come from pretty poor backgrounds until my great grandma and grandpa were able to even buy their house, their first house, and start to be in a place of sharing that generational wealth and having a home to go to. But it also was always a conversation of, well, you all are being a little bit too free. Like, oh, it's like my mom would be the one considered of like, oh, she's weird because she's just living so free. And it's just like, you
mm,
don't care about anything. And so even the viewpoint of what it means to be like a fully liberated Black woman still felt like my family had a very narrow definition of that idea. And not to any fault of theirs, but just because they weren't able to see anything different. And so I appreciate and I hold them in all that they had experienced and all the horrific experiences that they had. Because I have to talk about all those ancestors of, as I said, my grandma Savage, my great grandma and grandpa Wade, and, also my grandparents, the Lanes. So,
yeah, thank you for sharing their stories. I mean, I think you summed it up so well. I was gonna, as you were talking, I was gonna, my next question was gonna be, what is that cost of that assimilation that you've seen? And then I think you really started to talk about that cost, right? And I think you really honor your family by telling their stories and by, telling their stories and how it was contextualized by race and racism.
Right.
When you look at your family and you think about the essence of who they are, that's been in sort of conflict with the way the external world has defined them. What have you seen as the cost of that? What have you seen that you are now in the process of overcoming, where who they are at their core, their infinite being, their infinite self, the essence of them, and how they've had to, in some ways, I don't say be in conflict, but having to compromise because of what the world has presented, through the context. What have you seen the cost of that in terms of how you now are living your life?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I think what's coming up for me in this moment is they gave up a lot of joy and just full opportunities of like fullness of life. Like most of them stayed where they lived their whole life. They didn't, like my great grandma would travel a lot, and my grandma Savage traveled as much as my great grandma until she got older. And so I feel that they both had lived more full lives than my grandma Lane and my grandpa Lane until they started retiring, and then they traveled a little bit more. But they didn't live in New York City. Like they didn't get to just they loved like my great grandma loved Florida. So it's even
Mm.
just wild to once again be here. Like she would take a trip here, but she also like never had anything that she was just able to create. Like so I didn't see people creating like outside of like their home. So the home ended up being a place where that's where the adventures occurred. So my great grandma would be cooking like cherry cheesecake and
Mm.
making all her pound cakes and baking and salmon croquettes. And in the same way, I didn't see that my grandma had brought that same joy. Like I felt that she probably experienced a major intensity as a childhood, which she still hadn't shared a lot. We don't talk about it a lot, but so her joy and her practice of just being more open minded ended up suffering and being in that place. And also just not being able to just once again be in that full creation and a full expression of life, of moving in fear more than in curiosity, coming from that place of fear of like, well, what's going to happen? So that was worry was something that was big for the women in my family in particular, of like, well, you sure you're going to do that? You could get hurt
Mm.
doing that. Well, if you're going to cut your hair, like, are you sure your job's going to be okay with it? Like, well, how are you going to get a man? So like that was also a thing too, is the fact that, you know, being a homemaker and a wife was like the goal. And
Mm.
so everybody was shocked that I did not choose that as a path. I've always chosen and my career and been in relationship, but been in a place of like I wanted to live in New York City. So that was a goal of mine.
Mhm.
And so just realizing that cost of them not being in their full infinite beings and creation space of being able to be more of an observer versus like a doer at times. And I also want to lift up mom because she was like the first woman to do some really radical like so she was the first to move to New York and get married before moving to New York and be an artist and a seamstress and like wear Louis Vuitton before it was a fashionable thing. Like she made Louis Vuitton a house versus what
Hmm.
what was happening now, and her being in a place of always focusing on art and creating. But I also realized how incredible I saw how intense life was for her because she chose a different path. And I remember even as a kid telling her like, "Ma, why don't you just get a 9 to 5?" And I remember saying that to her, and I reflect on it. I apologize in this moment again, Ma, because I was even coming from that place of there's only one way of success. And that's what the message that I had felt I received from my family up until mom of like, there's only one way that you can be successful. You have to go to college, you have to get that degree, and then you got to work for essentially, help somebody else's business versus to create your own and, making sure that you change yourself to make yourself more comfortable and appealing to white folks. So
Mm.
that being the message and mom coming in with a completely different ideal, but like going to other family members' households and being like, well, Ma, they said this, but you're saying this. And so me having to figure that out for myself of like, well, what is it that you believe, Maya? And, honoring what my ancestors had chosen in their past or not chosen, right? I think because that there are some things that I do feel that the women in particular in my family didn't have a choice. And so I honor and respect that not all choices are even choices depending upon your survival. And I appreciate that mom chose something radically different.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm glad your mom chose something radically different too.
Yeah, she did a
um,
couple times, right?
yeah. Well, and probably most recently, me. So that's
Right.
another podcast for another time. So this is my
Exactly.
last question for you today. I think I have a stronger sense now than I ever have before of what it means for you when you talk about reclaiming savage.
Mm,
That is, something that you mentioned at the beginning of our first podcast, that you have a business that you're coming up in called Reclaiming Savage. And can you just talk briefly, like, what does that mean for you to reclaim savage? What does that
yes. So
mean?
reclaiming savages is about remembering and coming back home to ourself in this reincarnation of our soul in this bodily form and our infinite being and coming into that place of how limitless we can be. And
Mm,
one of my favorite Ndinkra symbols, which is an West African symbol, is Sankofa, which was the first tattoo I got when I was 18. And
mm,
mom couldn't be mad because it's such a positive sign because Sankofa is a crane with their head turned backward and it has a jewel in its mouth, in its beak.
mm,
And the symbolism of that is us to really remember to look back and get those jewels from the past and bring them forward and bring them into the future. And so reclaiming savage is about me remembering my Raja yoga practice, me remembering my vegan practice and discipline practice and deep breathing, and remembering and knowing how to bake my sweet potato pound cake that
mm,
great grandma made and make the cherry cheesecake, but using my own dietary of, mostly vegan and definitely gluten free dietary needs. And so really making and remembering and honoring my past of going and being in the South, this feels like reclaiming. And so through my business, it's about how and sharing my own practices of holistic care and creating those situations and conversations with other folks and community members to get them to remember and bring those jewels because we do get stuck in our trauma sometimes. And we have
mm.
to still think about that it's the only reason that we're here and we're all unique because of the experiences that we've had. And so that's reclaiming savage.
Mm, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So reclaiming savage is healing from that generational trauma. It's reclaiming, your ancestry is what I hear you
Yep,
saying. I heard you say earlier, it's reclaiming joy,
it
right?
is.
It's reclaiming the things that your ancestors couldn't have because of the generational oppression and the generational trauma that they had gone through. And I think, one of the concepts that I've learned that I'm feeling so strongly right now is the concept of healing backwards. Like that
Mm,
as we heal, we heal our ancestors too.
right,
And the way that I understand that is that, we're stopping cycles that maybe they weren't ready to stop. So as we
right,
heal and stop those cycles, then we're actually healing them too, because they always wanted those cycles to stop. They just didn't know how to stop them. And I'm
right.
just feeling that very strongly in what you're saying right now.
Yes, I feel you, Martin. That's what it's about because I do know that there was a time of it was too painful for me to look back. And we have to honor when, realizing that when it's sometimes painful, then that's when we know we need to delve into it in a safe way and a place that's supported to be able to heal
Nice.
it.
Nice. Well, Maya, this has been amazing. I really want to thank you for taking the time to, to share yourself vulnerably, and, to share your story and your family story, and your journey, towards healing. It's been incredible. Even me knowing you as well as I do over the last 5 years, it's still been incredible to, for me to listen. And I know it has been for our listeners as well.
Thank you, Martin.
Absolutely. So Maya is just one of the people that you'll encounter as you enter into this journey with us at Soul Focus Group. We want you to know how excited we are to have you with us. Everything that we do, everything that we offer, please listen to our podcast. You can find them on any podcast platform. Please go to soulfocusgroup.com and see everything that we're doing. We have so many new and exciting things, coming down the road here soon. So, we're just so happy to have you all with us. This is about transformational change in ourselves, but it's also about transforming the world. And it's going to happen. So we ask that all of you in that journey to transform the world, that you stay safe, that you stay well, and most of all, you stay soul focused.